Let's move to no cause to celebrate in Warren. Let's read what they have to say. No cause to celebrate writes in and says, I bought a house without an inspection, and then I found out that the seller closed off basement rooms to hide mold and also structural issues as well. What are my rights? From no cause to celebrate.
Well, first of all, as most of the answers that I usually start out with, I'd like to see a copy of the transaction documents. I'd also like to know, did this individual use a realtor, or did they buy this property for sale by owner? In the current climate where we have a very active market, there's a lot of sellers who are not even using realtors, and because it's such an easy market to sell property in, so they're just doing it for sale by owner, FSBO. And sometimes parties will forgo having an attorney review the documentation. So this is what I usually look for from somebody like this individual in Warren. I'm going to be looking for a copy of the purchase agreement, a copy of a disclosure statement, seller disclosure statement, and then I'm going to also look for a copy of an inspection report. Now, she's already told me that they have already said we don't have an inspection report. Okay, that's fine. You can waive an inspection. In fact, a lot of people are waiving inspections because they want to, they're trying to secure their home, and there's so much competition, and we understand that it's a seller's market. But it's really unfortunate if you do not have an inspection by a third-party contractor. So then what I'm looking for, if I don't have the home inspection, I want to know what the representations are that were made by this individual, the seller, about the basement and about these rooms that were not apparently disclosed. They were locked off or shut off. So, we would have to take a look and see what the representations are. I'd also want to know how long that seller owned the property, because it may be that they also didn't know that there were these rooms that were down there and nobody knew, they didn't know about. Because the law, this is like a constant theme that we're educating clients on. The whole idea of the Seller Disclosure Act, Michigan Seller Disclosure Act, that requires sellers who own real estate and they know about any home defects, any defects with regards to the condition of their property, they have to fill out a form. With very few exceptions, they have to fill out a form and they have to list what they know about that property in good faith. The key word is good faith. So if there's a known defect and the seller fails to disclose that defect, that is tantamount to fraud. Yep. It is a knowing disregard for the truth. That's all it is. It's the easiest thing to define, but it's very hard to prove because knowledge is very hard to prove. So it's easy to define, but hard to prove. So what we want to see, I can't give you a definitive, again, I can't give you a complete definitive answer on this file, except to say that if you're in the same situation, whoever's watching this, and you're buying a piece of property, ask to see the seller's disclosure statement. There's one more item that people should be aware of too, and that is, if you don't get the seller's disclosure statement during the transaction, all the way up to closing, even though you may have met all these other contingencies and you feel that you're stuck and you can't get out of a deal or a transaction, if you have not received a seller's disclosure statement by the time that you've gone to the closing table, you can cancel that transaction without any penalty. So let's say you get a mortgage. You got the mortgage, you got the title, everything is passed, cleared, you're ready to close, you met all the contingencies, but that seller never gave you the seller disclosure statement. It's not dated, not signed. You can back out of the deal. Now, if you close after the transaction, if you close on the transaction and then you say, hey, wait, I didn't get my seller's disclosure, it's too late.
Okay.
And so what we have to then look at is what were the representations made by the seller throughout the transaction. So let's say there was a home inspection, but there was no seller disclosure, and we have information going back and forth between the parties, maybe through the realtors, maybe not. And the buyer says to the seller, "Hey, did you ever have any water issues down in the basement?" And the seller writes back, "No, everything was great. Never had an issue in my whole life." Well, now that's, it's meant to mislead if it turns out that there is water in the basement and the seller had known about it. And there are so many ways that we can prove that. So even though I said it's hard to prove, we can prove incidents of flooding or incidents of water seepage or mold. That's easy to prove. It's the hard part is, what did the seller know about it?
Right.
Okay. So that's it.
No, that's a good question as well. And yes, so at the time of this recording, just to kind of timestamp it for those who might be watching in the future. So this is summer of 2021, and the housing market is very competitive. Very, very low supply of homes for sale and very, very high demand. So yes, a lot of buyers right now are waiving their right to the inspection just to push the deals through. So I'm sure this is happening to a lot of people. I'm sure a lot of people this past spring and summer have gotten into a home, and then they the honeymoon is over.
Well, that's why she's saying no cause for celebration. But let me share something else with you. You just date stamped this. We've had a very unusual season of rain, and there's been a lot of flooding.
Yep.
I have a file right now where these people purchased a property, and a couple of years ago there was some flooding in this area. They happened to move to Michigan from out of state. Nobody ever told them that the area that they were in, this is a couple of years ago they bought it, was a flood hazard. It wasn't in a flood zone per se, but there was flooding. And to make it very short, we just had the recent flooding, and the people are, of course, my clients are very despondent, and they're like, nobody ever told us about the flooding. And it turns out that the seller failed to disclose the flooding.
Wow.
And well, this is the best. I can't say names, but the seller also did not give a disclosure. This is interesting because it's very similar here. Nobody can find the disclosure, except that the seller knew about the flooding because the seller had registered their complaint with the homeowners association, and the notes of that meeting are the former seller talking about the flooding. She didn't disclose it, and so she knew. And she also didn't provide the seller disclosure statement.
Wow.
And this was a transaction apparently that was done without realtors initially, and that's why the disclosure statement was never provided, which doesn't excuse a seller who's selling their property on their own. You should have all your documents in order, regardless if you're using a realtor or not. But anyways, that's kind of, these are not questions that, they're not made up questions. They are real people who are calling every week. We get at least every month we get over 500 calls in our office related to real estate, just real estate. And then my clerks are sorting through what we believe are the most helpful or impactful for discussion. And that's what we have today.
Fantastic.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.